While half the planet is having meltdowns over whether a ball crossed a line, there's an entire population quietly living their lives who couldn't care less. And neuroscience just confirmed what they've always known. Their brains aren't broken, they're just playing by different rules. Let me guess. Someone just asked if you caught the big game last night, and your brain did that thing where it pretends to buffer like a slow internet connection. Not because you forgot, because you genuinely have zero idea what game they're talking about, and honestly, you're fine with that. Here's what nobody's saying out loud. Not obsessing over sports doesn't make you socially defective. It doesn't mean you lack team spirit, and it definitely doesn't mean you're missing some crucial part of the human experience. But something legitimately different is happening in your neural wiring compared to the folks who plan their entire weekends around game schedules. So why does everyone else seem hardwired to care? Simple. Humans evolved as pack animals. For millennia, your survival depended on being part of a group that had your back against saber-toothed tigers and rival clans. Sports are basically that ancient tribal programming with corporate sponsorships and better lighting. When someone watches their team play, their brain dumps oxytocin into their system. That's the same neurochemical that bonds you to your family. Essentially, their brain is convincing them that these random athletes they've never met are part of their survival tribe. Pretty wild when you think about it. But here's where your brain does something fascinating. People who don't get emotionally invested in sports typically show lower activation in tribal identification circuits. Your sense of self isn't wrapped up in group membership the same way. You're more autonomous, more likely to think, I don't need collective victories to feel whole. And research backs this up completely. Studies show that people with minimal sports interest demonstrate significantly less in-group favoritism. Translation, you don't automatically despise the opposing team just because they're wearing different colored jerseys. Your brain doesn't do that us versus them splitting as intensely. Now let's talk about what's happening in a sports fanatic's brain during a game, because it's genuinely concerning. You know that anticipation rush right before you open a gift? That's dopamine flooding your reward system. Sports fans get that identical neurochemical hit repeatedly throughout every single game, every play, every near miss, constant micro-injections of anticipation and payoff. Brain imaging studies reveal that watching your team activates the exact same reward pathways as gambling. The mechanism is eerily similar. And here's the really addictive part, the unpredictability. Not knowing whether your team will win keeps that dopamine drip going. It's called intermittent reinforcement, and it's the most psychologically compelling reward pattern that exists. Same principle that makes casino slot machines so effective. People who don't care about sports, their dopamine systems simply don't fire in response to watching other people compete. And this might be genetic. Research suggests that variations in specific dopamine receptor genes can actually predict how invested someone gets in spectator sports. Your complete apathy toward whether some team wins might literally be coded into your DNA. But there's another psychological mechanism at play. Sports fans engage in something called burging. That's basking in reflected glory. Notice how when their team wins, they say, "We won," but when their team loses, suddenly it's, "They lost." That pronoun switch isn't accidental. It's psychological self-protection. People who don't obsess over sports are less likely to engage in this identity distancing. Their self-concept stays more consistent. They don't need external wins to prop up their self-esteem. Their sense of worth is more internally grounded, less dependent on outcomes they have absolutely zero control over. Before the comments explode, I'm not claiming one approach is superior, but there are real, measurable psychological differences, and understanding them matters. Here's something that seems contradictory. Sports fans often score higher on certain empathy measurements. They're practicing deep emotional investment in strangers' struggles, as long as those strangers are wearing their team's colors. So why don't non-sports people feel that same connection to athletes? It's about empathy allocation. Every human has limited emotional bandwidth for caring intensely about things. People who don't follow sports aren't less empathetic. They're just directing that empathy differently. Social justice, personal relationships, creative pursuits, intellectual challenges. Research shows that people with low sports interest score significantly higher in openness to experience and aesthetic appreciation. They're getting their emotional highs from completely different sources: art, music, nature, ideas. Their brains are seeking identical rewards like meaning, connection, and transcendence. They're just finding it somewhere else entirely. And let's acknowledge something uncomfortable. For some people, not caring about sports is actually a protective response. Maybe they got bullied in gym class. Maybe they felt excluded by sports culture growing up. Maybe they're resisting the aggressive competitiveness that often surrounds sports fandom. Your indifference might have roots. Or maybe you just genuinely find it boring. Both are completely valid. But here's what really explains why sports fans and non-sports people sometimes can't understand each other. It comes down to how you construct meaning. Sports fans find meaning in narrative, the underdog arc, the comeback story, the dynasty, the rivalry. It's compelling precisely because it's unpredictable. Real drama with genuine stakes happening in real time. People who don't care about sports often find that randomness fundamentally meaningless. They think, why would I emotionally invest in an outcome I can't influence, performed by people I don't know, in a contest that doesn't impact my actual existence? They're not wrong. Neither are sports fans. Just two completely different approaches to humanity's need for story and meaning. One group finds epic narrative in a championship season. The other finds it in a novel. A relationship, a creative project, a scientific breakthrough, different paths to the same destination. Researchers call this parasocial investment versus direct engagement. Sports fans build one-way emotional relationships with teams and players. Non-sports people prefer investing energy where there's mutual reciprocity, where their investment actually affects the outcome, where they're active participants rather than passive observers. Neither strategy is better. They're just different approaches to navigating existence. Research on flow states shows that complete absorption can happen through countless activities. For some, it's watching sports. For others, it's literally anything else. And here's what's really interesting. People who don't obsess over sports often report feeling more engaged in their own lives. They're not spending hours every week experiencing someone else's struggle vicariously. They're participating in their own. There's something quietly powerful about that. So what does this all mean? If you don't care about sports, you're not missing some essential human experience. You're just different. Your reward system, your tribal wiring, your empathy distribution, they're all calibrated to different frequencies. And that's perfectly fine. Next time someone asks, "Did you see the game?" and you genuinely couldn't care less, remember this. You're not broken. You're not boring. You're just playing a different game, one that might actually have higher stakes because it's yours.